Good afternoon. I'm Wendy Block, Senior Vice President of Business Advocacy and Member Engagement for the Michigan Chamber. Thank you so much for joining us today for our second installment of the Inner Circle Legislative Briefing. Beginning this week, the Michigan Legislature will return to Lansing following their summer recess. In today's briefing, which is exclusive to Michigan Chamber members investing at an elevated level, it will feature our Michigan Chamber's business advocacy team, whose names, photos, and contact information can be found on your screen. Our goal here is to give you an insider's look at what might be considered this fall and how it will impact your business and your bottom line. Today's agenda will recap the governor's August 30th What's Next address and kind of some of those things that she outlined as her fall priorities. And then we'll move on to a few big ticket items we expect there to be pressure to move on this fall, including clean energy mandates, paid family leave, and more. We've built some time into today's agenda for Q&A. So please make sure that you enter any questions that you may have into our chat box, and we'll be sure to try to get to all of those. If not, we can follow up with you following today's call. So as I mentioned, the governor gave an unprecedented mid-year address last week, which she dubbed her What's Next address. In it, she outlined her top legislative priorities going into the fall and beyond. And the governor called for legislative action on a range of high-stakes policy issues, from creating a massive new paid leave government insurance program impacting employers of all sizes and types, to mandating 100% clean energy goals. We will dig into the details of each of these proposals this afternoon, but it's important to kind of understand the context under which all of this is happening. As many of you know, Michigan has a full Democratic trifecta across all levels of Michigan government, but that is kind of in question moving forward. And that's because two members of the Michigan House are running for open mayoral seats, and the Democratic majority in the House could shrink from 56-54 to 55-54, or even split power of 54-54, depending on the outcome of the November 7 general election. Another interesting twist, which is adding some urgency to the fall agenda, is this question of early adjournment or early sine die. We continue to hear rumors that the legislature could adjourn for sine die on or before November 9 because of these mayoral races, and because they wish to speed up the effective date of key pieces of legislation that have passed in early 2023, including things like an early presidential primary, enactment of right to work, repeal of the pension tax, enactment of the earned income tax credit, and more. So this makes the window between now and November 9 that much more critical for Democrats, which is probably why you saw the governor give this What's Next address on August 30 and call for the legislature to tackle these big items. To say that fall might be a busy time for us all might prove to be an understatement. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Michael Limo, for a full update on the clean energy debate.
Thanks so much, Wendy. Appreciate everybody jumping on today. Michael Limo, Director of Environmental and Energy Affairs for the Michigan Chamber. So as Wendy mentioned, the governor in her What's Next address last week did identify clean energy policy as one of her priorities for the fall. Interestingly, the governor does seem to be parting ways with what the bills as introduced currently stipulate. Senate bills 271 through 277 and House bills 470, 59 and 4761 all call for very aggressive renewable energy portfolio standards, 60% by 2030 and 100% by 2035. In the governor's address, she spoke to a clean energy standard, not a renewable energy standard. And we are being told that that wording is on purpose, and that the governor is looking to kind of negotiate with the business community and other stakeholders about what a 100% clean energy goal would look like. And she has also not put a time frame in place. At least to date, we haven't heard a specific time frame under which she would like that clean energy standard to happen. She also spoke to renewable energy siting as an important regulatory barrier that needed to be addressed this fall. This is a priority for the chamber as well. So generally, we were happy to see that she cited renewable energy siting as an important barrier that needs to be addressed. The governor did speak to the MPSC having authority over siting. And, in our work group that the chamber has had on renewable siting, we identified a different process that looks at putting siting still in the hands of locals, but with kind of guardrails and greater market certainty in place. So we've communicated that with the governor and with the legislature on the potential need to look at what we would argue is a more reasonable approach. We do expect a very visceral reaction from locals when legislation giving MPSC siting control drops. We know that Representative Ayash in the House is working on that right now, and we do expect that to drop as soon as this week. So again, we're kind of trying to be helpful, but also trying to ensure our members' voices heard on what's a more reasonable approach so that we can actually, get that done. On the Senate bills and House bill packages writ large, what we're hearing right now is that this discussion is likely to start in the Senate, and that by and large, it's going to be 271, which is the 100% renewable standard, 272, which is the expanded scope of authority for the MPSC to include environment, climate change, and equity, and 273, which is the expansion of the energy waste and reduction program to be what is kind of first, given traction and given some movement. And then we're likely to see renewable siting and some type of legislation on just transition being dropped alongside of those. It does appear that just transition, from what we can gather, means, kind of providing resources in some capacity to communities that have an energy plant go down or shuttered, and kind of what are the job implications and those types of implications of something like that occurring, and what can the legislature do on that front. So we do expect a new draft for 271 this week from Senator Singh's office. He's told us that it will be a market improvement and will maybe potentially look at a RPS lens that's slightly expanded to include things like biomass or municipal landfill gas. Again, those things likely would be an improvement to the bill, but would still be miles away from legislation that is workable. The chamber has testified in the House committee on these bills, and tried to testify in the Senate Energy Environment Committee hearing, although testimony wasn't taken, to voice our concerns that these bills do not take into account affordability and reliability protections to ratepayers in the state, and could lead to very significant economic consequences if they were to move forward. We led a coalition of 5 other business groups that signed on to a letter that voiced those concerns and kind of built it around key principles that we need to see in sound energy policy. So it is yet to be determined what is in that new Senate Bill 271. When we do receive that new draft, we'll be sharing that with Chamber Energy and Environment Committee members for a reaction, and also working to understand what is the timeline going forward here. We were promised a stakeholder process through the summer. That never happened, and so we're still working to try to understand what the next steps are and where the engagement opportunities are for chamber and chamber members. So I'll leave it there for now, and happy to take questions after we get through the rest of the update. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Mike. It looks like we have a few questions already in the Q&A box. So Mike will take a look at those and get to those when we move to our Q&A section. The next big issue that we want to make sure we address this morning is on the question of paid leave. So the governor in her speech, this did not contain a lot of details, but she called for the creation of a new paid leave mandate for the state. It is our understanding that the proposal that she is working on is largely based on legislation introduced in both the state House and the state Senate, and that the state Senate bills will likely be the vehicle bills. So Senate bills 332 and 333 create an expansive state administered paid leave insurance program funded through a new tax on employers and in some instances on employees. That is, excuse me, if the employer chooses to pass along 50% of those costs to the employee. So the bill creates what is known as the Michigan Family Leave Optimal Coverage Benefit Act, and it would allow employees to take 15 weeks of paid intermittent leave from work to care for themselves or their family members and gives 10 days for bereavement. Standard reasons for leave could include a whole host of things, ranging from FMLA type leave to trailing military spouses and other military reasons, to closures for schools and workplaces due to public health emergencies, COVID type care, doctor's visits, mental health issues, school meetings, and otherwise. And recipients would be entitled to receive unemployment like benefits for this leave, but it would be more than unemployment benefits. They would be eligible to receive 65% of the state's average weekly wage, or approximately $788 per week. By comparison, the unemployment program offers claimants $362 per week. This proposal is estimated to create a new tax on employers, a payroll tax on employers. We believe it is $1 billion plus per year program based on what we've seen from other states that have similar programs already in place, like Minnesota and Washington State. It would impact employers of all sizes and types. There are no exemptions for employees, and there are no exemptions for employers, including the very smallest of our employers across the state. So this is different than Michigan's Paid Medical Leave Act, the act that is currently being litigated in the Michigan Supreme Court. So it would be on top of that, and it would be on top of other PTO type benefits that the employer provides, with some stipulations that are outlined in the bill. So, we have voiced significant concerns out of the gate with this proposal, both with the sponsors of this bill and in reaction to the governor's speech. We are very much concerned about creating a new employer funded paid leave program that would allow employees to miss up to 1/3 of the work year, and how this would be one of the most expansive paid leave mandates in the entire country. Just have very significant concerns about the lack of opt-out provisions, even for employers that have significant policies currently in place, and the fact that the proposal does not contain any sort of upward cap on assessments on employers, taxes on employers. It basically gives the state treasurer the authority to set the annual contribution amount with no upward limits. So we are very much concerned about this. We're understanding that these bills will start in the Senate. We have been meeting with House and Senate members throughout the summer on this proposal, on clean energy, on a number of things, and have had the opportunity to have many conversations. We have found more reservations in the House than there to be in the Senate. And in the House, we're finding reservations both at the leadership level and at the individual member level. But we understand with the governor's speech and her making this a priority, as well as the Senate wanting to prioritize this issue, that this could easily get legs, and will need to put in significant work to try to address this and make sure that it doesn't go to the governor's desk for her signature. On both this and the clean energy issues, we are formulating coalitions. So stay tuned for details about that. Um, and feel free to put any questions about these proposals in the chat box. But I now want to move on to a few other issues that we are expecting for the fall. Mike's going to start with an update on polluter pay.
Awesome. Thanks, Wendy. So as many of you know, or at least some of you know, the legislature has been voicing interest in putting into place what they're calling polluter pay laws that would make significant changes to Part 201, which is the state's contaminated site cleanup program. The chamber has been circling the wagon with legislators since the beginning of the year. Number one, to educate folks that we do have a polluter pay law on the books. Part 201 is a polluter pay law. If you pollute, you are obligated as a responsible party to clean that contamination up. And there are other processes in place to make sure that contamination doesn't migrate from sites, et cetera. But what really, at least what the environmental community is pursuing is looking at making significant changes to Part 201 that would say, one, that if you purchase a site, if you purchase a brownfield site or a new site for development, and you find contamination, you are responsible for that cleanup, whether you caused it or not. That is a pretty drastic departure from where we are at today. And it's important to note that, in the mid 90s, it was the urban core mayors that got together to pursue what is now Part 201, to thread the balance of making sure that public health is preserved, but also, ensuring that it's done so in a way that isn't cost prohibitive to developers, so that these sites can still get cleaned up. So if you move too far away from what Part 201 is right now, the reality is that those sites become cost prohibitive to clean up, and developers will simply walk away. There won't be the funds available to clean these sites up, and we're in a worse place than where we started. And so we have met with a majority of Democratic lawmakers in both the House and the Senate to have these discussions, and have seen, kind of similar to Wendy's synopsis on paid sick leave, we've seen more sympathy in the House on this issue than in the Senate. Although that being said, we feel fairly confident that we have a block of both senators and House lawmakers that would voice concerns and hesitation for supporting significant changes to Part 201. Senator Irwin and Representative Morgan are both leading the charge on these changes. And frankly, we've seen 5 bill drafts now from Senator Irwin, and they're all unworkable. And secondly, they don't actually address changes to Part 201. So they're ancillary to Part 201 in that they do things like piercing the corporate veil, so that if you have a cleanup incident take place, the liability and criminal responsibility would go all the way up the decision-making hierarchy as far as it could go. Doing things like having to provide financial assurance and bonding for the economic impact of every single molecule of a regulated chemical that any business handles or has on site being dumped into the ground, which from our understanding would be physically impossible to do and cost billions or even trillions of dollars to actually comply with. So Senator Irwin has taken an extremely aggressive and unworkable approach to these bills. We've continued to educate lawmakers on that front, and have had very productive discussions with lawmakers, but leadership, particularly the House, and Eagle, who has also internally voiced concerns with these bills and saying this is not, what we asked for and not what we would like to pursue when it comes to making any changes to Part 201. In the meantime, the chamber has hosted a Detroit tour, looking at a former DTE site that has been cleaned up utilizing Part 201, and had Detroit lawmakers out to that. And we're going to be doing one in Grand Rapids on the 25th. Looking to do maybe one other one in the Bay City region as well, to kind of continue to educate lawmakers as we work with Senator Nguyen's office to get these bills in a better place or kill them outright, frankly. So I'll leave it there. Wendy?
Yeah, so just a few other issues. We do have some questions in the Q&A box. If you'd like to submit your question, please do so. But we are looking at a number of other labor proposals and have been working on these across the summer months, starting with legislation to give the green light to Michigan's 1,800 local units of government to pass their own local labor laws. Think about things like local minimum wage, local paid sick leave laws, local predictive scheduling laws. We believe that we are in decent shape on these proposals. There's a bill in the House and the Senate. There was a hearing on the House bills. This is one where we're going to have to continue to keep the pressure up to help legislators, especially help them hear from their local businesses and from their local chambers of commerce about the dangers of this proposal. But we feel like the efforts on this legislation have been working, and right now we don't feel like this legislation is in a position where it is going to move. We have heard from some legislators that they would like maybe to allow local units of government to enact their own project labor agreements, but maybe not the rest. So you might see a scaled back bill try to move out of the House at some point, but even that seems to be in that question mark column. In terms of the independent contractor issue, there is legislation out there to put in place a California style test for determining who can and cannot be classified as an independent contractor in Michigan. We've spent the summer talking to legislators also about this legislation and just the widespread implications it would have across all sectors of Michigan's economy. Again, this is one where we feel like these efforts have really helped move the needle. We now believe that we have a very solid chunk of Democratic lawmakers, in addition to all House Republican lawmakers who are firm no votes on this legislation. So unless the other side pivots and tries to do something that is more scaled back, we do not believe that the bill in its current form is likely to move this fall. But again, it's one that we have to continue to keep our pulse on and keep our eye on moving forward. Moving into some things in the unknown category, we continue to hear that legislation is being prepared to make sweeping changes to both Michigan's workers' compensation and unemployment insurance systems, both to be more favorable to claimants. We are not sure yet what that legislation might entail. We're hearing that though the trial lawyers are drafting the workers' compensation changes and the labor unions and others are drafting the unemployment insurance changes. So stay tuned on that one. Those could have a big impact on your business and its bottom line, given that those systems are 100% employer financed. We definitely have concerns with some of the rumors that we're hearing, but are waiting to see those details as they emerge. And then finally, I just want to mention that there's legislation out there related to what's called bad faith insurance proposal. It's kind of hiding under the guise of consumer protection, but intending to force insurance companies to somewhat pay claims and ask questions later. It is being driven by the trial bar in Michigan. We have serious concerns about how this could raise the cost of insurance by billions of dollars and have been fighting this over the course of the summer, talking to legislators about our concerns along with others. Again, feel like we're probably in a better place than we were going back a couple months on this legislation, but have real concerns about the need for this legislation and just see what other states have done in this regard. And it really hasn't produced any results other than driving up insurance costs for businesses and families across our state. So I want to maybe pause there. Mike, we have 3 questions in the chat box. I don't know if you want to try to tick through those before we say goodbye.
Yep, perfect. Thanks, Wendy. First question on funding for just transition. Where would that funding come from? That's a great question. We have asked the governor's office as to has there been any ideas floated for this concept, because it is one of those bills that we're really just hearing about, but have seen very little detail on. The governor's office has said, good question. We're looking to find out as well. So it sounds like this is something that likely Senator Singh is pursuing, and we're trying to figure out the details to that. So more to come on that, but I think frankly that could be the crux of the issue for how we view that bill. We'll keep you updated. Carbon capture, I think, will be a priority of the legislature, at least as part of the discussion. It is yet unclear as to whether they'd be willing to pursue legislation specific to carbon capture. As you likely know, or as folks may know, right now the Senate legislation effectively bans carbon capture in its, in setting its energy mandate of 100% RPS. And so that would be the first battlefront, is to at least ensure that the new draft or future drafts of 271 don't outright ban carbon capture as a key solution here towards achieving decarbonization in the state. But then ultimately, we will be pursuing legislation on that front. We've begun to do some joint meetings with Michigan Manufacturers Association on that, and frankly, the response has been positive. I think conceptually, at least some members of Democrat caucus understand that this is an important piece of the puzzle, and that needs to be part of the discussion going forward. And then finally, the question on nuclear. From my understanding, 271 states that nuclear can be part of the RPS credit or REC credit at 2035. So again, very uncertain as to whether we would even be able to get to a 60% renewable goal by 2030, and at what point in time does nuclear start to count towards that? So we will see this new draft soon. There will likely be changes to how these what's all in the credits and how they are established. So more to come on that as well. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Mike. And there was a final question about the independent contractor proposal and whether if the legislature made exemptions to the legislation as they did in California, whether they would be likely to change their opinion and support the bill, or whether the chamber would support the bill if exemptions were made. We have really been trying to tell legislators that the exemption route is not the way to go on this legislation. If you look at California and what they've done with their exemptions, they have passed 109 different exemptions to their law. Another 60 are being actively considered. This legislation has been subject to a successful ballot proposal. We just feel like if you need to make 100+ exemptions to any one piece of public policy, is probably not very well thought out, and there's likely to be winners and losers in that scenario. We're instead asking lawmakers to kind of double back and help us better understand what problem it is that they're trying to address. They've been talking about, wanting this legislation or wanting to pass this legislation in the name of addressing wage theft. But we're reminding folks that we have a test under the law today, and wage theft is illegal today. So if it's a question of enforcement or otherwise, we would rather have that conversation rather than blow up the current test we have and to start over with a broken California model. And that response seems to be resonating with legislators. So at this point, we're not talking about exemptions and trying to, figure out who could be winners and losers in that debate or fight. So hopefully that answers your question. And I'm not sure that we have any others. So I want to make sure that we say thank you for attending today. You will be receiving a survey in your inbox, and we hope that you will complete that. It will help us decide, how we format these calls moving forward. We move this call from 1 hour to a half an hour to try to be judicious with your time. But we'd love to hear back from you with any questions or input. You can feel free to reach out to us individually at any time. My contact information is on the screen. But again, we appreciate your investment in the Michigan Chamber, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. Thank you.